It's my great pleasure to introduce Bruno Siqueira, who is a computer scientist with 5 years of experience in systems development and software management. He's also an open source enthusiast, if I understood that correctly. And he has founded a really interesting website called Amizade, Positiva, where people with chronic diseases can actually meet each other and talk to each other and find each other for the first time, probably. He's working with Instituto in Igarapé, where he works on all kinds of very interesting questions ranging from smart policing to children's security. Welcome, Bruno.
Yep.
Then I have next to me Gala Chigas. She just told me this morning that she just left her position as co-director for collaborative learning at CDA, where she focused on systemic analysis and evaluation to improve impact of peacebuilding work and the work we all do. She helped a number of institutions like OECD DAC and DFID improve their own systems. And she's currently mostly interested in the question of cumulative impact, which could be an interesting one for this conference. What is our impact altogether of our peacebuilding initiatives? On trying new tools for evaluation and on the role business play with peacebuilding. She's also a professor of practice of international negotiation and conflict resolution at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. Welcome to you too. They will start with an intro with raising a couple of questions, both of them, and then we'll get into a dialogue with the audience after that. I give the floor to Bruno to start.
Thank you. I'll be fast, I promise. I guess we can start by reflecting on how a few years ago conflict zones were very resource scarce. They are not right now, but for the past 10 years, ICT development brought a huge revolution to war zones and the dynamics on how communication works. It brings all these challenges, all these scenarios, but what are those challenges and how well does it work in the real world? So first I have to start saying I'm not a peacekeeper. I haven't worked directly with peacekeeping operations. I'm just a software developer. But I do come from a country which is one leader of homicides, and I lived in the 90s in Rio de Janeiro. And for the past 3 years, I have been working in Igarapé Institute, which is this think tank, and we have been trying to use technology to make people safer. And there we have developed all these different data analysis and platform visualizations. Like we have mapped how arms trade and ammunition works around the world. We have mapped the most homicidal countries. We have tried to understand how safe children feel in low-income violent communities. But more importantly, we have been testing for the past few years how body-worn cameras work in sensitive areas like Brazil or countries in Africa. So we can start by thinking about what technology cannot do. And it's not a super bullet. It cannot solve all the problems, and it's not all positive. And peacekeepers, officers, actually everybody, we need to understand that's not going to solve magically all the problems, and it's just an extra tool. It's just a new way of trying to deal with a known problem. And as much as it brings a lot of good things, it also brings ethical problems. Yes, it brings powers, but it also creates vulnerability. Citizens, technologists, peacekeepers must understand that, and there are risks around there. There are spying drones that can collect tactical information for an enemy. People can listen in, can steal information. Peacekeeping is under attack due to exposure. People know who you are, where you are, and what you say. But this cannot be a setback for all this innovation. As Diana said so well this morning, this is the world we live in. We have to adapt to it. And we have to actually understand the risks and try to control them and try to predict them and try to stop them as much as we can. And yes, I'm optimistic, so all those risks are true, but I do believe that technology brings a huge impact and is much more positive than it is negative. And we have seen all these different deployments, amazing. Like, of course, there are drones. They are transporting medical supplies around places. They are providing hotspots with 3G, 4G connections for areas post-conflict. There are also some tests of using drones to transport blood samples for fast testing in laboratories far away. There are games that have been used to bring closeness to different parts in a war. There are virtualization that brings awareness of people from different religions and different ethnicity and different cultures. And yes, there are watch groups. They are bringing awareness and using social media to control violence in their neighborhoods. In Brazil, we had this huge campaign last year over gender equality and against women violence that brought a lot of awareness and a lot of discussion that wasn't happening a few years ago. And it brings a lot of empowerment that it's maybe the first time I have seen for a long, long time. And of course, it brings challenges. So far, technology has been a wave of innovation. And there are many hackathons and coding initiatives. But how well does it work in the real world? A lot of those projects, they are very enthusiastic, new technology ideas, but they do not yet have a lot of evidence that it actually brings an impact in those scenarios. We are still lacking monitoring and evaluation. They have a lot of goodwill, but we still need more quantitative and qualitative information. And more than having, maybe, I don't want to say more, but also as important than having all the civilians involved in those issues, is also very important to have local governments and security institutions involved also. And having those technologies and all these ideas more institutionalized can be the difference between having a project and having a long-lasting solution. And from my experience, some of these institutions, they sometimes don't believe the use of those new technologies, first because they don't want the change, and also they don't have sometimes the progressive mindset, and sometimes they don't have the money, and they don't believe that there can be out there a solution that is cheap and also effective for them. Just a small example, for the past 2 years we also have been working with firemen in the south of Brazil, and they decided on their own to start working with open source solutions and also in-house developments. And this kind of solved the problem of having huge millionaires contract with all these proprietary solutions, and now they have simple solutions that are adapted to their needs, and it works pretty well for the scenario. And after a while working in that area, also it's true that especially in these fields, which with so many different scenarios, we cannot have a out-of-the-box solution. And customizability is a key feature. And we have been using body-worn cameras, and we have one solution, and we have been testing, trying to deploy it in different scenarios. And again, it doesn't work the same everywhere. Every time we have this amount of work of testing and understand their needs, understand their limitations, and we have been trying, and it works well for us. We have been trying to try agile development and running small pilots of 2 weeks, and trying to adapt the technology and have time to see if the technology works for this scenario, and also if they accept this. Because again, we don't want to deploy this amazing new solution and technology to those places. We want to help, I don't want to say solve, but I want to say want to help with their problem, and we want to make sure that it can actually be effective. Another problem I have seen is integration. Over and over the years, I have seen a lot of projects that are very similar to each other, and even our projects. I have seen a lot of other projects around the world. They are very, very similar, and it feels like people are redoing the work over and over again when they could actually be more integrated and be reusing more of what exists already. And that's why I think Build Peace conference like this one is so amazing, because it can actually bring awareness that, oh look, that other person is doing something pretty similar to what I'm doing, so maybe I can talk to him and we can join forces. And I think this is one point that is still lacking in this area. Okay, so I'm going to stop now. Just to reflect on the theme of our kind of transformation. For me, transformation in the next few years in technology and in peacekeeping will be the maturity and the integration and the coherence and the metrics that it's going to be generated, and you have to start learning how to collect them. That's it. Thanks.
So Bruno has said he's not a peacekeeper, and so I will say that I am an immigrant to the peace tech field, not a native. And so part of what has been very fun about this dialogue, which we've had now over the past few months, is actually been talking with Bruno. But I do believe, and I think it's just said, that this is part of our world, and as a field, peacebuilding field really needs to figure out how to engage. So that's one of the reasons I'm here. So talking about sort of transformation for peacebuilding field, which as an immigrant, 1980s when I started, I mean, there was nothing like this. We installed the first early warning big computers in the former Soviet Union to do an early warning effort. So come a long way. So last month I was going through Facebook mostly to figure out what my daughter, who is not communicating from college, is doing. And I came across an open message from Arato Markoulis, from those of you who were in Cyprus or from Cyprus know, was the former foreign minister of Cyprus, apologizing for what she called horrible crimes committed by Greek Cypriots who murdered 200 Turkish Cypriots in several villages in Cyprus in 1974. And that was for me sort of a big deal, why I'm in this field. She's not current, but a former foreign minister, government official who, by her own admission, for the last 42 years has been with the government condemning the quote-unquote heinous crimes of Turkish army and Turkish Cypriots against Greek Cypriots, and is apologizing and calling for a truth commission. So for me, this is a sign of transformation. I had met her when I started working on Cyprus in 1991, and so I know this is a big personal transformation for her, but also saw this as a transformation, a sign of transformation in the situation that she could and would come out and say this. And so that's what we're in this for. And in my life in the field, and I'm sure many other peace builders in this room can have many similar stories that they have experienced and seen and witnessed of profound transformation. I've spent many years working in the Caucasus, Georgia and South Ossetia, witnessed the journey of participants who, from the first meeting when they were in the room and went to either side of either corner and refused to look at each other or talk to each other. A year later, the two government officials who were there, one sent an ambulance to rescue the son of the other in South Ossetia, bring him to the hospital, and the two of them were working behind the scenes to try to make the negotiations work. And there are many, many such stories, and that's, I think Sanjana said much more beautifully than I would. It really sort of starts in that personal transformation. That is such a key piece of conflict transformation and much of our practice that we have that you hate to lose. And so I could go on. But these reflect very difficult, profound journeys that people go through in changing their own attitudes and confronting the past and dealing with the difficult past, transforming how they feel about the other and also about conflict. And so that to me is part of transformation. But after, I think, 15 years of working in Cyprus and in the Caucasus, I think, and many other people started asking, well, it's not enough. And in George and South Dakota, they said after 4 years, they said, well, yes, if it were just up to us, we could solve the problem. But it's not just up to us, it's up to all of society. So we need to be thinking about how do we sort of move from that personal transformation, which is a great source of motivation and work, into thinking about how do we transform group relationships. How do we think about the structures, underlying structures, societal relationships? It doesn't happen by itself. And so we need to think about how to move that. And technology here, I think marriage of technology and peace building has a tremendous opportunity to help do that. But it also means addressing the underlying structural causes. And the Reflecting on Peace Practice program, which I used to run at CDA, when we first started it, we asked people, how do you define peace? And then we decided we didn't want to go into that because it gets defined in 20 million different ways. But everybody agreed that yes, it's an end to violence, but it's more than that. And I think as a field, we know that it's more than that. It's really building just and sustainable relationships and structures and that change the relationships fundamentally. And that's what we're kind of working at multiple levels, at personal, at relational, at a cultural, a structural level. So to me, that's what transformation is, what I'm working for. I'd add one thing, and Sanjana mentioned it, you've mentioned it too. Many of us, not everybody, but many of us come in as outsiders and provide assistance to these processes. And so the transformation is just as much about how we do our work as it is about the results of the work and the work itself. And so is our practice consistent with the values and the kinds of relationships and processes that we want to create and to transform. And in our own research and learning at CDA, we found outsiders are really appreciated. And so it's not that we're resented. But I think, as you mentioned, they were accused of coming in with all sorts of the same solutions and the same solutions everywhere. I mean, there are many kinds of criticisms, but the expertise is appreciated, and our support and accompaniment is appreciated. But the privileging of external expertise over the wisdom, the contextual understanding, experience of people who are in the conflict kind of invisibilizes, I'm using a term by John Paul Lederach, what that local wisdom is, and doesn't really build a partnership that I think also undermines effectiveness, but also undermines the credibility of our own work. So part of transformation is really thinking about how do we do our work, and are we working in real partnership and consistent with the values that we hold. So I'll just say, I think to put out some questions that we've been talking about over the past few months that we've been preparing for this, about the challenges of kind of marrying transformation, technology, and peace building. And I see technology has tremendous potential. And for those of us who've been really struggling we work with small groups, we work in small places, we work in communities. My whole project was really thinking about how does that contribute to the larger, well, peace writ large. Technology has tremendous potential for helping scale things. And so it's really, really exciting. It has tremendous option for bringing new options to addressing some of the problems. I've been doing a lot of work on corruption lately and looking at some of the platforms for people reporting corruption and the technology that's been used to deal with issues in the courts. So it's very exciting, establishing new ways of engagement, ways of being more inclusive and giving voice to people who haven't had voice, ways of organizing. So there's lots of amazing things that I think we can work with. So the questions, it's really challenges, because I think we have to adapt how we do. The first is how to be strategic. Are we ensuring that we're addressing the root causes and dynamics of the conflicts that we're working on? How do we ensure that the technology isn't the silver bullet, as you said, that we're not thinking of it as substituting for actual, real strategic thinking? And I think of a few areas where this is a question for me as I've been working with it. One is conflict analysis. The kinds of tools of bringing together data, the visualization tools, which are very cool, that the Institute is doing and a number of others are doing. And have a capacity to help us understand real patterns and trends, which is really important. also have the risk of having us focus on symptoms and events and not getting underneath. And so I think we need to figure out how to balance that. The sites and the crowdsourcing, I've been working in Uganda now on corruption. There are, I think, at least 6 ID Thrive kinds of sites. And so my question then is, okay, what's the strategy? What happens with that once that reports it? Do we have a strategy around that to think about? Are we thinking that that's going to solve the problem? Because it doesn't. Feedback mechanisms, which we've also been working with. The technology that's been employed now by humanitarian organizations and development organizations to really reach out to people who are participating, who are affected by their programs, and get feedback on these are tremendous. But do the organizations actually have the will and the capacity to analyze that data, to use it, to learn from it, and to actually act on it? So if we don't, then it's just a lot of good technology and data, but we haven't done anything for it. So that's one set of questions. The other has to do with, I think what Sanjana called the art. And so how do we integrate this technology in these new spaces for engagement? One of the essence for me is sort of the capacity of peace-building practice to help people humanize and relate at that profound level to others. And how do we make sure that that gets preserved? And there are a couple pieces. One is around sort of scale versus depth. The technology that I've seen and I've seen used with many of my colleagues has tremendous capacity to expand participation. But how do we then think about the depth issue? Are we expanding at the expense of depth? And so that for me is a question. And how do we use that or supplement it to make sure to get that real human, affective, really emotional connection? Because that, in many ways, is at the core of what we do. And then I think the final thing is we have a lot of tools, and I don't think this is a technology specific, but the ethics and conflict sensitivity. I mean, we've been talking about this around humanitarian aid, around development, around all sorts of practices. And now technology comes in and we need to then adjust our thinking and our frameworks for dealing with that. Do we have the tools and processes to address those concerns? As outsiders, are we is the way we're introducing technology and using it reinforcing patterns of relationships between people from the outside and the inside that aren't consistent with how we want to operate? Are they reinforcing power relationships that shouldn't be? Or are we figuring out how to use it to really have real partnerships and equalize power? And then are we aware of the interpersonal harms? We've been doing a lot, I think there's a lot being done on privacy concerns and on security, but there's a whole range of other things that we have tools around do no harm and conflict sensitivities, but they also need to be updated to really take into account and be able to help us think about these issues. And then final, I think I'll end where you ended, is it's very exciting, but can we start collecting, I'm an evaluation person, so I have to say this, can we start really thinking about how do we evaluate the effectiveness so that we can learn about what works, under what circumstances, what questions should we be asking, what kinds of processes can we put in place to start getting those lessons in a real evidence-based way.
Thank you so much, Diana. Thank you, Bruno. They got us really to the nuts and bolts of the question of what does transformation mean individually now for technology and for peace building, and how do we combine them. And you gave us a lot of questions and a lot of food for thought for the discussion now. What struck me is that both of you went from the individual to the collective in asking your questions. One was to say all of these individual projects and things going on, how do we institutionalize them to become one transformation? And then Diana focused a lot on how do we get from the technical, from me in the mirror to, how do we get from the individual, me in the mirror, as Helena put it before, to the transformation that we want in the society and that we want to spiral to maybe a worldwide transformation. So let's open it to all of you. You can either respond to a question that Diana asked or that Bruno asked, or you can ask further questions. And we really want this to be an interactive dialogue, so we ask you to be brief, and then we can really get a lot of people the chance to talk now in the time that we have left. We will try to do it without microphones. If you speak up, it should actually work. But if not, we'll hack our way around that. So, who wants to start?
My name is David Gallego from MIT. We're launching a peace tech initiative at MIT, and I first time at one of these conferences, and I just want to express about this whole peace tech direction. For decades and hundreds of years, people have been trying to solve violence in general, and trying to think what should be the emphasis of this. So what should be the emphasis of this direction? Should it be reconciliation, lowering of crime or violence, empowering vulnerable populations? And we can't solve all the problems of all the world unless we sort of decide what a direction is. And just from your own experience, this direction of peace tech, what should be the focus? Is it reconciliation? Is it empowerment? Is it solving crime? Is it somebody ignorant just asking a question?
Well, I come from are you hearing? Yeah? Okay. I come from a very urban scenario, so our solutions are very much directly connected to the everyday life of people going to work and coming back, and how can it benefit as not intrusive as possible. I guess. Maybe I'm repeating myself, but after seeing it happen over and over again in these scenarios, I think that the big challenge and the big benefit it could bring is bringing new technologies and integrating with the existing ones. Because what I have seen is that sometimes you have this big solution to solve this small problem, and solutions might not solve everything, and as you said, it's not going to solve all the problems in the world. But it has to be some type of way to think before it's implemented of integration. Public institutions and security institutions already have a lot of different solutions in place and being deployed. And new ones, if they are not integrated with the other ones, if there's not data integration and data analysis from all these different tools that have been developed from all these different companies and institutions, and then it's going to be left out after a while, after the excitement passes. So again, in these urban scenarios, to have it working for a long, long time, it needs to have better integration and better understanding of all the other different tools and solutions that are already in place. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Just build on that, because I think at a broader level, I think what's most effective is when it's driven by the context and the people who can then integrate that into their own practice. So in that sense, really looking at what context, what kinds of organizations and people will be using it, and having some of this be driven by their needs and capacities, I think is a better chance that it would be used and be effective, and also put people who are going to be the users out of the driver's seat.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Jill. I come from an occupational science perspective that believes people need to be doing, need to be active to stay healthy and happy. And one of my concerns is that with the increase in technology, people's productive roles are requiring less physical and cognitive activity. And I'm just wondering how we can develop technologies that can support more physical, cognitive, and social interaction and processes, and your thoughts are on that.
Again, from a very urban, thank you for your question. Again, from a very urban scenario, as much as we have been deploying different technologies in all these different sensitive scenarios for the past few years, we are still counting primarily on people getting engaged. So if you have body-worn cameras for officers, you have to count on the will of the officer and the will of the institution of embracing that technology and actually using it and actually believing in it. And this was actually something that was very surprised in a positive way. I thought the resistance towards it would be much higher, but when they, especially in Rio, where we have so many problems with our police, but of course we have bad ones and good ones, but when they understood that there was a tool not to be a big brother over their work all the time, but actually it was an extra layer of protection, they really embraced it and they really believed in it. So again, all those solutions are going back to human activity and the human importance all the time. And yeah, I think you cannot, at least in this scenario, you cannot really take out the human importance because you're always depending on them.
This is something we've been discussing for a while too, is that I think it needs to, can't substitute for human, for some of the other, if it's useful, if it's part of something and supplements, but not necessarily a substitute for it. And I look in some of these other sort of where, in peace building work, where it can be a powerful tool, but it's not going to substitute for some of the activities and some of the conversations and work, but it can really help to enhance it. And so I think the challenge is figuring out how to integrate it and not necessarily replace activities.
Hi, thank you guys. My name is Justin Hefter. I'm the CEO of Bandura Games. We're using games and social networks to connect people across conflict regions. And I guess my question is more specifically for Bruno, but Diana, if you have other ideas as well. You guys talked about transformation. You also talked about metrics for transformation. And Bruno, you are using social networks to transform people's lives. And so I was wondering if you had any specific anecdotes or examples of that transformation from an anecdotal perspective, as well as from a metrics. What are some of the metrics that you guys look at for transformation?
Specifically for social networks or in general?
Specifically, I mean, with Amizade, if you have specific examples there or other examples that you've seen.
Okay. For this particular network, which is a network for people with chronic diseases to start connecting with each other, we have a few anecdotes of people who actually met each other and people who had exchanged information over treatment and brought awareness of other problems that some people thought they had, but they didn't. They had something else, so they kind of helped us to initiate a proper medical treatment. And but all very informal because it's a very private network, so we don't really connect information. It's just a social project. And with body-worn cameras, we have collected some anecdotes, and we had already some situations where police officers actually recorded some problem, some crime, and it was used already as a basis for prosecution. So yes, it does have an impact. Some of our other projects are more in an initial stage, and we're still collecting, and then we are going to start analyzing and creating also public platforms. And even creating a public platform to present this data in a more organized way that didn't exist before, this is already a huge impact. Bring awareness of these statistics to people.
I think one of the challenges on sort of creating metrics, and is, for example, and I now just read about 120 evaluations of Israeli Palestinian peace building, many of which use social networks as part of their, is that to say they'll count things like how many users are out, how many times they're using them, et cetera, but it doesn't really tell you what's the quality of the relationship, what's the quality of the communication, are they doing things together? So I think that's sort of at the cutting edge of really thinking about it. There have been some that have actually analyzed some of the content, but some of it's private, so we run into those issues. So I think part of the answer is there aren't yet, but it really is an area where we need to go.
Can I just do just a small compliment? I just remembered regarding metrics. The institution I mentioned before, the firemen in the south of Brazil, they started using open source and they started developing their own software, and they started creating their own dispatch manager for occurrences. And they had this metric that, like 1 year ago, they had this X time to finalize a task. And then they calculated that after they implemented it increased in like 3-4 minutes, something like that.
My name is Sanjay. I lead an organization called Soul Colombia. We do self-organized learning environments. And my question is, how do people who are part of the conflict, how would you say they understand transformation? What is transformation for somebody? Because I feel, at least I'm outside of it, so I can see transformation, but who is in it and who lives it, what would you consider that they think transformation is? And what role does technology really have for them in that?
This is why when we started the Reflecting on Peace Practice project, we decided not to define peace. Because I think in many situations it looks very different to people in different contexts, and it evolves. So what people think of as transformation at the beginning may be different later on. So I think there was a general sense of really addressing some of the underlying sort of justice and sustainability root causes of conflict. What people understand those to be, how they understand to go is really often very context specific. So it's hard to be very global about it. So a lot of what we end up doing is trying to figure out, really connect and understand how people think about it, and then understand what is the most appropriate thing in that context at this time, and work from that basis. It's not a very satisfying answer, I know. and for all of us, but it's also the reality. It's all the reality in terms of effectiveness.
Coming from an NGO perspective, and knowing a lot of other NGOs, especially in Rio, and that work in low-income communities, I can sadly say that a lot of people, they don't know that transformation is out there, and they don't know that transformation is possible. For them, it's their daily life that it's like that, and they a lot of times they don't believe that it can get better. So bringing that information to them, and bringing the social projects, and bringing the technology, and showing them how it works, and engaging people in all these changes, I think it can. It's just a little transformation. It's very small, but it's a start. So. Being close to the people who are actually using it, it actually makes you understand more what they need, and makes the technology part closer to us, and to their hearts.
My name is Umar. I'm a photographer and a peace activist. So my question is on transformation in peace and in technology. Now, recently there was a controversy. A Norwegian newspaper published a picture on Facebook of the Vietnam War, and it was banned by Facebook because it violated their community standards. It was on the napalm attack. It's called the Napalm Girl picture. It has a woman who was attacked by a napalm bomb. So when it was, so basically the Norwegian newspaper editor challenged the decision of Facebook. And according to recent studies, Facebook, 40% of people globally, their first channel of news is Facebook now. Now, when Facebook launched, it was a social media site, and I'm sure Mr. Mark Zuckerberg never realized that he would eventually become what the editor of the Norwegian newspaper now says, he's the most powerful editor on the planet. So I would like to comment on that, how that social media page, Facebook, which was meant to connect people from universities and from workplaces, has now become the most major news network across the planet, and how that then plays a role in transformation in peace and technology.
Yeah, that was really, for those of us who were there when the picture was originally taken, it was all over the newspapers. That was a real shock to hear that. And I say this with my professor hat on, because one of the things that I think I feel is my responsibility to do is to have my students, and many of whom are in their 20s and 30s now, really start looking for different sources of information, because I'm really concerned. I think when we were at MIT, some of the statistics that were coming out, how much Facebook really connects you with just the people who believe in what you believe in, and they're similar. I mean, you can start seeing the snowballing dynamics of something that actually worsens conflict because it entrenches you in the views that you already have, rather than engaging you with views that are different. And then you have a whole layer of censorship around it too. I mean, it's a real bias. So I think it's our responsibility to help people, and I see this with my daughter, is that we're trying to really be able to be much more critical and understand what the biases might be, and start looking for different points of view. And part of transformation, part of peace building is really saying, there are different people see things very differently, and part of what we need to do is be able to understand that. And with that point of view, you can start going into these and saying, ask yourself, well, what's missing from this picture? What else do I need to be knowing? What parts am I missing? Because it's a disturbing trend. I agree.
A few years ago, Ingrid Betancourt, when she was kept captive by the FARC, she sent a letter and she said that people don't care about you if you're just a statistic. And I think it's kind of what you're talking about. Why don't we take numbers more seriously? And this is actually a discussion I had with a physicist 3 weeks ago. I'm very image-driven, and I get very sensitive when I hear personal stories and when I see touching pictures. But why don't we also collect more information from statistics and all this? We all know the numbers of Syrian refugees, but why did it take an image from a kid in a beach to get people more engaged than all those warnings we have received so far? I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for you, but it's just more as a reflection about what are our priorities and why does an image have so much more impact in our lives than a study or statistics or a known information that it's out there for a long, long time already.
My name is Jesse. I work with Interpeace, and I mainly work in Somalia and in the Somali region. I wanted to ask if you can kindly comment a bit more about the question you asked of how to be strategic, especially for an organization that you've been working in this context for quite some time, like 20 years. Like Interpeace in Somalia, we've been working for close to 20 years. And we are at a point where we are asking, how can we be strategic in our work, in our peace building work? Because right now, and I think it's in any conflict context, after some time, many players come in and there are a lot of initiatives, and in the end, you end up asking yourself, are you being strategic enough with a long-term goal of answering the question of, am I being effective in what I'm doing? So I just wanted to hear a bit more your perspective of how can one go about, attempting to answer that question of, am I being strategic in what I'm doing?
That's a big question. And Somalia is a tough place to think about that. And most of my peace building work has been dedicated in the last few years to really thinking about that. And being strategic doesn't mean you're going to solve anything, but it means that you have a higher likelihood. And my sense is that figuring out how to really understand the context, and where are there some points where there's some places where either, where's Chip? From a systems point of view, where things are changing already, where we can support it. I think systems change best when they change themselves. So as an outsider or as an intervener, figuring out where there's some places where change is happening, where we can support it, and thinking where things are needed, and tying our interventions to that. Because what I see often is people come up with an activity and they assume that it's going to have effect. And really just getting those assumptions out and saying, okay, how do I think this is going to affect the situation? And saying, are these assumptions, given this context of this time that people we're working with, are they reasonable assumptions? Because you don't know until later on whether they're valid. And how will I know if that's the case? And then maybe just making sure you keep your eye on that ball. It's sort of like the I paid a bribe. there's a clear theory somewhere in the back of their heads of why this will work. And there may be pieces of the strategy missing. It doesn't mean that it's a bad idea, it may be an incomplete idea. So kind of that iteration of just coming back to the assumptions of where do we want to get, how do we think what we're going to do is going to get us there, and have we tested the assumptions that we're having. I mean, it's a fairly simple way, and there are lots of tools to do that, but I think it has helped a lot of people just, most people have it in their heads already. It's a question of surfacing and articulating that and discussing that within the team, but also with partners.
I'm going to be repeating yourself. Yeah, it's the same thing. I think being strategical is being interactive and being connected to the people who are using and trying to understand their problems over the assumption that technology is awesome. And yeah, trying to figure out how well does it apply and if it applies to them, and always being also that there's a broader scenario than just all the effort in one tool, which is one part of the big solution.
Thank you.
Hello, hi, my name is Monica, and I run Pax Manifest. It's a small consulting firm where we do ICT for peace. And I worked a lot internationally doing ICT, and in the last 3 years I've been working locally doing community organizing and doing much more local work with refugees, with social cohesion, and also with mothers that have had children killed by law enforcement. And working locally is very different because you actually have to build rapport and respect. You have to look at sustainability, not just anybody who will work with you. Incentives are very different. And so what I've been wrestling with is in organizing, you meet people where they're at, not where you want them to be. And you work with those directly impacted by the pain, right? And I didn't find that too often international. It's kind of who can work with you, what target audience you can get, who will take your incentive. And which I think is not good. And so locally I felt like it was a lot more transformative. But when I'm asking this community's highly impacted people, children killed by law enforcement, to make this VR documentary with me, to be doing this kind of technology, it kind of feels frivolous and kind of superficial, just to be frank. And it feels like I'm just wrestling with this as a tool with those that are directly impacted, which I think is where the pain is, where we should really be close to. And I don't know if you had any thoughts about that and how close we get to the pain, if this tool is even as useful, or should we just work with people that, kind of look at conflict and talk about it and like to, meddle in it, but not like been victims of it.
Yeah, I wrestle with that too. Sometimes when we are testing the tools in low-income communities, you start reflecting, is it really changing people's lives? Is it really bringing a huge impact in their lives? And as I said before, a lot of times they don't even know there's a possible small solution there. Even if it's small, it's something. And you have to bring awareness to them. And when we were working with interviewing children in low-income communities in the north of Brazil, we knocked people's doors and we explained them what was the project and how we wanted to understand how people perceived violence and how we wanted to create proposals of public laws to improve their lives. And as much as they were excited, they were also questioning, yeah, it happened before, a lot of people came here already and they said they would do something similar and it didn't happen, nothing happened. Doesn't mean we should not try. I don't know. I don't know. I think if there's a small chance of changing their lives, even when going back to body-worn cameras, which is the project I've been working, or if there's a chance that this camera is going to record an officer aggressing a civilian, and if it can generate a persecution, it changed one life. So It might sound frivolous, I agree, but if we can generate evidence, if we can actually check and understand that it's a positive and it can actually bring change, then I think it's worth it.
It strikes me the fact that you're asking that question is a big step in itself, because it puts you in a relationship with people to ask them what they think is frivolous or not, and to look at that. And I just found it, as we were doing work, one of the things that a lot of people don't do in peace building is to ask exactly the question they're asking. Is all right, so another 10 people have come here and nothing has happened. You know, why, and why is what we're doing got to have a better chance of being more effective than what they did in the past? And I think that's a really valid question, that if we don't go in and at least have thought about that and have those discussions with people, it's not very responsible practice. But it feels like you're in that, as outsiders. I mean, I think many times you bring something that's innovative, but you need to be in a relationship with people so that if it's not relevant, you need to say, okay, it's not relevant, then we have to go and do something else. It's superfluous. Otherwise, we're pulling people away from things that are much more important for them to be doing something for us. So part of it, I think, has to do with the relationship with communities you're working with, and it sounds like you're here already.
Great, thank you very much. We have a lot of more people who want to ask questions or comment on things. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but we have another 1.5 days to continue our discussion. So please give a warm round of applause to our speakers.